Intro-based concrete actions are key to address infrastructural questions that pure academic announcement papers over Brian 12 over supposed to be even all history given existing conditions. The idea seems to be addressed these things between your hands where sort of extraction that allows after when you go to solve mediations and when things embedded. This sort of critique will always solve against any other most academic life is going to carry out treaties and announced. If you report purposely realistic alternatives 6 week abstractly identifying how networks structures as the regime of action to have your remade occurred workable alternative phase 1 after auto critique phase 2 and phase 3 come with the revolution complete social transformation. We seem stuck without ever explaining what is being done in phase 2. Often the critiques are right, but nonetheless have all sorts of problems. The arch critique and toxic standings jump into all the ways these things contain dirty secrets and all. Human Phillips explain people depend on network production shelters, medicine, how we lead these problems to is being serious about distribution and production system. I would love to hear radical environments talk about high school level maybe academics on how which you provide for decisions that would be plan for waste disposal, critiques easy and safe with miss every point we occupy moral superiority. Every know something is wrong with the team or institution for shout and out scenario analysis is pedagogically valuable, enhances creativity and self-reflexivity, deconstruct cognitive biases, flood ontological assumptions, and enables imagination creation of alternative futures drama at all 16. The culture of relevance and political science will implement in one competitive generation with them to reach programs that are actually policy relevant, strike literally attention, creative techniques, scenario analysis, converse decision makers, to future states, and conventional extrapolation scenarios of the same serving corporate planning or policy not inherently limited. These stories characterize scenario analysis or just building current trends and unexpected combinations are particularly surprising and impossible features referred to as ultra-real scenarios explicitly forecast or projection based on linear extrapolations and hypothesis based expert predictions or should be equated with simulations where a representation of real institutions instead they're depictions of future probable states of all together with driving causal force that will give these features. This repeater to make scenarios look particularly useful. The ability to make this because of action that don't prepare participants to understand the future by the existing mental backgrounds. Well, no cognitive bias and these such as grouping, confirmation of bias, power scenarios, less their ability to help individuals forget conventional modes of thinking. Imagine alternative future through a structural non-total process that follows making innovation to how to direct something altogether to the present scenario. And also through a sharp relief overlook mission practice international scenarios the ability for looking at different questions of empirical importance in accurate and existing future program participle and strategy for everybody feels of creativity and opportunity assumptions. The different scholars from analysts from participating in understanding skip the next card's theory. 1 is 1 error theory, A point the F gets it because otherwise the net can engage in infinite abuse. B point is dropped the debate or the short one is irreversibly skewed from abuse on substance time investment on theory. C point no RB has a 6 minutes for not collapse or short shell and get it with infinite abundance abuse. We have sheer brute force and time spent on theory. Second is reasonable F interrupts. A point there are multiple T interrupts. 1 and C can read like speculator spec by which means the affirmative will always violate something. If the interrupt the F is okay, you should default substance is always stop it is unique to the resolution, whereas the majority of debate education occurs. B point there's only 4 minutes in the 1 hour degenerate offense and standards while still covering substance. Reasonable F interrupts allows to actually get education. Second, the third is RBIs. A point is skewed. There's no 2A C developed carded offense and the 1 hour has to overcover since the 6 minute 2 hour is devastating, which occurs into underdeveloped T in the NC and overdeveloped in the NR. Need the RBI to develop good in-depth T offense. B point is rest CT's unique avenue to develop that the F can access makes T structurally unfair with the RBI advantage. Loopholes in campaign finance laws means there's almost no transparency. Radar around 12 months after the election, we found how donations go from 110 to 1200,000. We'll never know how much parties spend where the individuals, the national parties count as separate entities, which means every potentially donate up to 96,000, which have public knowledge. Individual candidates expend indicate nil spending funds that are usually controlled. The certain election has no way of knowing how many parties actually send. The public funding system barely across disclosure and only post-election. Mueller 17, the Australian political funding disclosure system is a disclosure thing. The J-search first report changes to result from the report for the modern electoral environment. The amounts required disclosure of all the donations up to $1,000. Within 15 weeks of the election, in 2006, the CEO was amended by Howard Coalition, amended to increase the disclosure threshold up to 10,000. The disclosure system has undergone no substantial code changes since other than increases the disclosure threshold. Transparency, skidded democracy, and higher quality civic engagement. So you're right, and all the 9 the majority of inquiry participants support the disclosure because it enables citizens to see who and where given much candidates provides safe progress and inappropriate influence the political system, which would large much private money. Creating for citizens being able to make more informed decisions, increase the public confidence in democracy is not as best disinfected. Democracy is declining now, opening up the process key all over 14. The majority of young Australians don't think democracy matters. We take democracy for granted. I don't think we have a world where that democracy would look like there's a difference between having voice and making a difference. We need to learn from those who don't hold these really making our politics more credible people. It's slipping. It causes corruption. Harper 18 for many people with low public life and notion of the position of number of periods of purpose in 2012. We ranked 7th in transparency. We're not 13th. When power is coupled with greed, corruption will follow. Corruption is denominated intelligent, welcome their defenders, and skilled at concealing their misbehavior. Operating with the spheres to connect them under corruption. Local politicians claim it does not exist. Weak campaign finance restrictions allow foreign countries to control Australia. Cabe and William 17, Australia's intelligence chief, identified 2 prominent visits to Chinese as agents for the Chinese government back from effort to shift for the desire for delicate policy of Beijing's fair China. Attempts to rise house economic and political influence causing for donation about the legal different in its opaque finance system. The broader economy, the role of big money in Australian politics can be divided as one way to know limits cultural self-corruption. The Chinese learners have learned to exploit transparency and democracy, solve a litany of civic impacts like populism, evidence at all. 18 lack of trust on rise political engagement, impacts on the confidence level, democracy, willingness to vote, taking protest activities, lack of trust, a key factor in pushing citizens to more populist alternatives. Thus, the plan, the federal parliament of the Commonwealth of Australia ought to require candidates for public office to disclose campaign finance information. I've inserted any clarification in the document. Disclosure solves. It reduces corruption, boosts democracy, solves citizen interest, and is key to enforcement of other corruption laws. Lit Review and New Empirics, Long and Hazelton. 17. Disclosure source of information and permits to become a worthy interest supporting candidates. Identifying candidates are relying on other conflicts of interest, which would deter corruption, journalists, and rebels, and active on the other hand, supporting major scored candidates for correctivity, donations, scandals, and public humiliation, survival for diversion, donation laws, and political taking on compliance without a discrete data for satisfaction of money, spending for competition and for reform. There have been accounting studies, donations, these studies pay little attention to disclosure between most of these studies are coming for commentaries that compromise the opinion of authors without an extensive empirical base. We seek to deeper understanding of Australia donation disclosure data is drawn from inquiries into interviews. The inquiries receive submissions from politicians, parties, interest groups, regulators, industry representative, private citizens. 181 submissions. The second data was 50 submissions. Demand for the political donation disclosure exists. Interview number, experience number 1, director of an NGO that scrutinizes political donations. 2, former Australian Liberal Party politician. 3, former political advisor. 4, prominent academic. 5, former Australian Democratic politician. 6, former Supreme Court judge. There are still people interested in such information. Political donation without information is a solid case which ensures how disclosure can refers to corruption. They can't solve money in politics. Only the plan checks back and solves democracy. Recent failed attempts at reform dumped all disads. Mueller 17 interacted with disclosure and active political campaign environment that helps democracy around an active public political debate and public advertising makes a significant population across the election. There's little aspect of reducing Australian public election campaigns. In essence, ways to control the major election campaigns, the money must come from somewhere. This is enough. We some combination of public money donations. The main policy option would seem to relate to the donation disclosure. This pursuing attempted recently, but no changes have occurred. Sorry, all that's are they the front lines of the plan? Yeah.
Very good. What is the enforcement mechanism when ACI? What solves the action?
They can't run if they don't disclose.
Okay. What are the qualifications for disclosure?
Yeah, there's a huge thing underneath the plan text.
Can you go through?
Yep. They disclose any expense donation above 1,000 AUD. It occurs within a week of banking and either is placed on a federally provided website or the candidate's own website. Disclosure also includes.
Okay, you said Australian democracy declining now. What are the warnings?
Yeah, they were ranked 7th in transparency by the Global Corruption Index, but they're now 13th.
Okay, what is the plan, or why is financial laws key to resolving this?
That would be the really long piece of Long and Hazelton evidence that articulates that there is public interest in knowing about donations. People care about them. And
why is that a key issue for democracy?
Sure. I think the impact evidence highlights that the lack of transparency is what it's not democracy writ large. There is a specific impact about corruption and lack of transparency in Australia. It's not like it solves democracy.
What's the warrant on the Evans evidence?
Which one?
The Evans evidence, transparency, democracy, solve a litany of civic impacts.
Sure. The lack of trust in the political government and the lack of transparency impacts levels of confidence for people to engage in that government.
Where does a lack of trust come from in a democracy?
The fact that Australian people have literally no idea how much political parties are spending where and where they're getting that money.
Where's the line? I think that's the key issue for trust and not some other reason why they don't care about
the Rayner evidence and the Mueller evidence.
The Rayner evidence doesn't make a key claim, it just says that there's some distrust, but why does that mean that people will suddenly trust candidates post the act?
It's not about trust, all of these impacts are not switch hitting impacts,
if the impact's about civic engagement and increasing that, why does the plan lead to more civic engagement if people still do not trust candidates?
It's not people still don't trust candidates. There's a problem with transparency in terms of donation. The Long and Hazelton 17 evidence did a literature review about public and about the
corruption or if the impact of solving corruption to increase civic engagement and trust.
It's not solving corruption to increase civic engagement and trust. The F decreases corruption, the F increases transparency. And the Long and Hazelton 7 evidence did a literature review about the Australians care about things like public funding. It says that multitudes of people actually do want to know what these things are. They care about how they're implicated.
This question still has been answered as to why campaign finance laws would increase, create trust in candidates again.
I was answering it. The Long and Hazelton 17 evidence is about disclosure of funds, i.e. campaign finance laws, the F. And it is a very well-warranted piece of evidence that articulates exactly why it's good. There are a bunch of reasons. I'll go through every single one so I can make sure this question is completely answered. The first one is deterrence. It means that if everything is public, it means candidates are less likely to engage in criminal activities. That's warranted. The second one is
the alternative democracy? And what's the warrant?
I didn't read the code record.
What's the alternative democracy?
Well, it's not like democracy writ large again. We think there's populism rising, we think there's corruption, there's lack of transparency, the affirmative results of those things.
Okay. 4 minutes. concrete alternative for the design metals?
Something that deals with not just the telos of where we want to end, but something that possesses the time, place, and action to take that decreases amounts of material violence. The act is an example. Just because other things are examples does not mean the act is not a good example. Obviously not a real bright line, like these which are.
How far did you get in? What was the last one?
I read the Mueller evidence. And I did not read Blanker on the frame. Is it 1 minute?
Yeah.
Okay.
3 off, please.
Order on the app.
Now on like the conference Wi-Fi or like
Conference.
gas?
Is there like a code? I think there isn't. I think you just, there was like a sheet of paper in the other room that said like open, and then in parentheses, no password.
I'm ready.
Very good.
Anti-corruption movements and attempts to create transparency are merely strategic play by global capital and will contain the perfect neoliberal obstacle as well as create a new form of neocolonial that destroys any sense of collective unity. Focal 10.5. Fighting corruption, defining human politics from the World Bank to Trump. Corruption is a product of the historical force and clash of the definition of corruption by international institutions defined behavior that with rules regarding private interests that is shifted into definition of corruption reflects the broader move for the World Bank to crush corruption as a single great obstacle to global development zone. Anti-corruption policy must change feature development crossing institutions that feature neoliberal whether the corruption is not really seen as an impediment to development. Corruption was acting conducive to development. It could cut red tape a lot more stopping must be as much as they will enter that big consequence of being compelled to follow new policies that by the world wide corruption or excuse the blame for the suffering and inflicting our world impoverished nation failure to modernize world with the flood of countries own epidemic corruption can be essential obstacle to world development. Anti-corruption policy and transparency and sustainability to the interest of international capitalism, moving money for India because it can handle much from the police and corruption, disbanded increase autonomy, local bureaucracies, and other corrupting influence of mass politics, make them more dependent on the international institution. Anti-corruption plays central role in anti-politics and entire system of corruption. Only somebody outside the system will be able to meaningful change the leases by the charismatic authoritarian outside politics by dictator Bolsonaro. Anti-corruption is by political instruction center the police corruption, corrupt self-serving leader like Trump, technocratic anti-corruption, politically disillusioned with politics, helps corruption, tied insulates corruption from how many counter massification, called rallying to corruption, the least of the seeds of no down for corruption, anti-corruption movements, posing a danger with the regarding politics, looking at what extensions of politics can never be done. More than self-seeking, the issues for love concentrated on maintaining its own purity, embracing more system rather than power without playing the benefit from the accountable leader to change the world struggle and not the different corrupting effects of left-wing or anti-corruption politics and politicized corruption in ways not neither motion nor technocratic has focused on reducing source systemic corruption, ideally finding quality policies designed to promote intuitively abuse and enforce very regressive accountability measures. They don't, they ensure an evil mindset that glorifies calculable expert information and obfuscates radical change which tends to domination towards 8 Koyama Kanye 14. Transparency and important apparatus and the transparency non-neutral part of construction to obtain information. This obfuscates the conflict of voting and alternatives to the epistemological critique calculable mapping technology accountability within hegemonic transparency, discrimination, standardization, accountability, transparency, literally make everything white suits black, making transparency measures of extreme relations and neoliberalism, cause exchange, mass social body gas and go to legal issue, misses the root cause right after the alternative. Farbach 15. We transform the policy that can help the members, capitalism, that seems to be a do or die movement, since the emancipation has been forming rapidly, increased credit capture, consequently, global capitalism, exposure, social inequality, key economic liberty, right country, wealth administration, global about their time for endless growth and instead our tried coaching courts and nature-brain solutions can be legislative promising temporary minimum code taxes to transform into politics that is steering with his way for destructive path degradation life with the point of dark and you have a moral obligation to reject every incident copies that each side promotes the top of religion my citizens you can do it. 4. Ethical political responsibility counter capitalization of the non-nominalization military subject by neo ideology naturally capital life presenting outcome of winning and losing a matter of some judgment neutral marketplace human cost and the inherent global poverty degrade license economic health social good remain inside completely which are from the law of capitalism the alternative that's completely withdrawn from the law of capitalism and one of the alternative they want to permit your obligation to either reject the an ideology for the thematic solution Johnson 4. The most important action negative figure count as ideology in space or manual translating everything inside the confidence curve to get the potential operator of those practical role judges to break down system power 12. So you're dystopian because no judge market society fundamental movements conditions continue to start and we can all over the ethical idea we have no shape of the doubt about the program ability to global market neoliberal model based on American society starting to turn into a story and taking the practice like continuing to political pedagogical language addressing the change taking order with counter jobs one on because it covers the educator and accountable global capitalism and crucial ability to control the reject off the distribution market ability civil liberties suggested before the critical pedagogy that how we cable with honey no but next up is that Trump represents a decline of global market how the rise of China but not to be a rock contemporary investment market of the advantage ideological as the Western market not control authoritarianism far more practical predecessor going to in China non-democratic form Chinese regime that has success in raising major condition population benefits of market happily distributed democracy people primarily are showing itself capable of planning for the long term revealed by the massive recent Chinese infrastructure by democratic really time to rise up for promise to dignity by American contemporary job like physical growth everything over the benefit Trump has shown little capacity deliver his him by checking boxes the very top and the Western market demand the right to democratic some voted European has been tracked by promising government chief market and not Senate election take place with the choice and FBA plan is the link recalibration market to check China rise goes over global the plan of was pointing her current movements part 513 economic growth is but hammer bloated curve to global democratic nation church and democratic bomb vessels and copycat China rather be leader developing nation we're looking for growth problem with democratic reason will live a Western market we on the sort of laws with developing country promising with the Western country much more democratic from all gains condition either the inside of the development instead of from low to multi-party market continuing this not forget the power serving driving form the autocrat political government in the West on and after the global needs to convert the beautiful organization talk about it on Facebook and the death evil of certain white town countries markets could be held by Chinese software necessary addressing environmental policy this comes to Rob 17 fighting environmental issues online environmental method the CCP smart still long-term emission reduction and in fact we can export before Trump he was going to be doing clean energy now trying to further the state or trying to change software Trump political as foreign policy money development environmental government is keen all the way to consider essential sets Chem 16 delineating environmental policy is directing civilization ecology and biodiversity ecological movements under which humanity can exist more than 900 treaties and often not discuss the extinction rates of the uninnovated international government ability insistent upon universal treaty youth participation love environment offered efforts tied down to incapable growth space skip the next one on base democracy causes terrorism, politics, stop, and mind democratic stability to be targeted transnational terrorism, blood targeted movement, annual terrorists not take over the right to the repressive regime but terrorists get organized, democracy with a permissive environment, terrorists with donors, software, extensively called terrorists freedom gives the opportunity to publicly hunting terrorists, create what's free and democracy causes terrorism backlash, classified terrorists would attack democracy, president, or the democratic Brazil over the family to commit a all kind of not those top every country will come to democracy, reproduce democracy, deep down country, lead trust democracy, evolution, your mind to an anti-American terrorism, going into the cause exchange of chromium 14. Terrorist organization come to virus, nuclear weapons, 30-year groups, still in Pakistan, global stock nature, decrease in shield on physical, global basis, ongoing child use budget, and kind of like take the resources, whether terrorism, democracy causes defect, short 12. President Clinton under the effects of the data and the likelihood of eligible to recognize prices down for the democracy emergency requirement of moment interesting in the local government policy that identify just authorities local leaders republic as mass mayors hunting blessing and into energy to leader into an advantage let's like negotiate with bureaucracy and message to love great disease causation about 17 of pandemic was where we can actually history with drugs are all over 10 can become infected we heard border launcher then things after the pandemic could cross border we know this flu could kill 30 human 3 days no right down could the cost of war could have really committed problems that nationals had diminished SMLV 711 democratization, increase in national ability, make the political learners trade, return to the one, increase the prices, balance clashes, the balance of pressures, the power back and transition, we see monopoly in the force and certainly lose and certainly create human probably weakening of a state authority, the insecurity, European non-civil honor, commitment, and social change, the lowest below, and the laundry and disease, narcotics, terrorism, all time. 12. All states and neighborhood impacted civil and several adjacent states of refugees, they try to raise the risk of civil war, that is some of the state economy, infection, disease, global spread, illegal narcotics, distributed by global forms, terrorism, by state can reveal outside government, those two arguments here on the democracy, their democracy, good warrants were very violent, that there should be engagement arguments that there are new progressive authoritarian regimes such as China coming, which is the data that would prove that there is no other alternative to any they go for this a democracy is good is solved by the argument that China and other democracies are creating better forms. Also the argument that the affirmative doesn't have any actual solvency, so the argument how the disclosure will lead to more investment in democracy, how candidates actually don't care, which means all their often is predicated on a question of increasing some of an engagement campaign, financial disclosure and so also supercharge the link to the calculate the argument that campaign finance disclosure and itself does not do anything because it just furthers the investment into international capital. This system, which they've argued, their arguments about concrete alternatives make sense. The argument that cap is also an alternative. We're just rejecting policies like the one you see there, neoliberal, which means we are concrete alternatives.
I didn't read Iraq A.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah. Okay, are you ready?
Yeah.
Ready? Alright. Let's talk about these democracy impact trends. The one about the laundry list of impacts: disease, narcotics, terrorism, and violence.
Yeah.
This is about how refugees are bad. How does the affirmative cause refugees to come into Australia?
I don't think that is specific to the impact card there.
Okay. Do you think that, quote, refugees advance the spread of infectious diseases such as HIV and malaria? Do you think that's true? Because your card does.
No, the argument here is not that refugees are inherently bad. The question.
But do you think refugees spread HIV and malaria? Are refugees dirty people?
No, but I do think that in a world where democracy imposes that on them and things like civil war make structures worse for refugees, that these problems are imposed
Well,
on
your
refugees.
card doesn't really seem to care about refugees.
Yeah, sure. My argument here is that democracy imposes these sort of negative stereotypes of democracy. Things like civil war posit refugees in a worse off position, which would be a reason as to why the cards things talk about how democracy and refugees interact with one another. Right? The argument here is that
Okay, status of the
democracy-
critique.
Conditional.
Conditional?
Read a new act.
Okay. Yeah, I was just asking. The Civil War thing. This evidence is about democratization. I aid like democratizing countries. Why is that the affirmative?
The argument here is only that one. This is proof how you would make democracy more appealing to other countries, and independently of that, the plan itself leads to a form of democratization, which is problematic.
How does the plan lead to democratization?
That is the entire one.
It is not the entire one. Like democracy, more transparency, and democratization of developing countries are two very different things.
Sure. I mean, I guess the fallback there would then just be if you win that claim that the dissent would prove that there's some sort of spillover effect, and that in a world where democratization is declining now, the AF would increase that.
Okay, the affirmative increases overall democratization. If that is the case, let's talk about the environmental governance schemes led by China. How does China sort of do this? How do they go about like making environmental schemes better?
Yeah, the argument here is that China is then perceived as less popular. People don't want to work with China when democracy is looking so good.
No, I'm not asking about the link. I'm asking about the impact. How does China?
Oh, right. Yeah, it's Chinese software, like negotiations making deals with other countries. But in a world where no one is China's not appealing to anyone, there won't be any negotiations.
Okay, that's fair. The sort of Kemp evidence highlights that insistence upon treaties and U.S.-based participation ties down sort of like advancement. Why does the uniqueness evidence stop adherence to treaties or other countries wanting to work with the U.S.?
Can you restate the question?
Sure. Your impact evidence highlights adherence to treaties and always wanting to include the U.S. in negotiations.
Yeah.
Why does the U.S. get pulled out of negotiations just because like Trump makes people mad?
I guess the argument, I think that misconstrues the evidence. The argument is rather that there are no other countries that are willing to invest in these treaties and strategies, which makes it impossible for global
And insistence
cooperation
upon
to
universal consensus-based treaties is left. Okay.
Yeah.
Starting prep now. Stop, 45 left. Yeah, the dissent, the critique, sending it out. Okay. Evan.
You see that top down?
The F is going to reduce corruption, lack of transparency in Australian finance is a very specific problem that allows people like Swallow to get away with having lots of money from different interests and the people not being able to know about it. The affirmative is key to increase transparency, which solves a bunch of impacts like populism and the Australian government's having a bunch of conflict of interest because politicians will vote for laws or whatever generated from them, things like interest groups, etc. All of these things are resolved with the affirmative. It does not result in full form democracy. To overview impacts of their impact trends. First, the affirmative does not result in any new democracies. It's not democratization. It just says that transparency in Australia is good. It's not resolve democracy writ large, which was cross-sex. Second, we'll concede the last solvency arc that maybe that the affirmative doesn't result in spillover. That takes out all of the impact trends, the line by line. The line by line terrorism is about targeting democracies that Australia doesn't get targeted, and if it does, it's not unique in the first place. Falling from 7 to 13 doesn't mean it's less striking to be targeted by terrorists. The next piece of evidence is about transitions from democracies. Affirmative does not transition from Australia from a developing state to a democracy. The crony evidence about terror is false because there's no way in hell any terrorists in Australia get nuclear weapons. The disease argument, disease is not unique because how it isolates multiple branches as being the root cause of being unable to deal with disease in democracies, but obviously the affirmative doesn't cause it to collapse to one branch, nor does the status quo. The Civil War argument, it's the populism intrinsic because the first line is about how discriminating against ethnic minorities results in independently none of the internal evidence is actually about the affirmative. The time card is a voting issue. It's incredibly racist. Refugees are the carriers of disease and danger. Disease and danger, it links into this conception of the other. The other is something dirty. It carries this and they carry HIV. They should lose for reading it. The China solves argument. No, it doesn't. China doesn't solve the advantage because obviously we need local transparency. Just as China promotes democracy in the context of environmentalism doesn't mean it result the affirmative. The dissent. There is not a link to this dissent. The uniqueness evidence is about Trump saying U.S. soft power is down. The affirmative does not increase U.S. soft power, nor does it increase broad general democracy. It just says that the impacts of the affirmative results are good. Now, the link card, the impact debate proper, they do not have any piece of evidence that says that their impact evidence highlights multiple all causes to them being able to solve warming in the first place because it says that things like a focus on treaties and wanting to include the United States. The story this dissent is terrible, and you should not let the 2 hour make stuff up that's not in their evidence. Now, the impact proper, they cause colonialism. South 14, China's engaged in colonialism, how to skewed economic ties, the pattern skewed economic resource exports, and military translate to job creation. China's criticized taking advantage of African countries while China produces resources. African nations stagnant. There's people who have no lack of resources. China's snapping up the resources. Let us zero-sum competition for finite resources that can trigger new wave of global conflict and massive environmental destruction. Again, I will reiterate the no-link argument and explain it very, very clearly. The affirmative is not like democratization abroad, nor does it permit any of that. It was cross-sex and they don't have a link to the entire 1C strategy. The critique. Framework decide whether the affirmative is a good idea. That's key to clash engagement and debate over the topic. They concede to the bar. Evidence for the scenario analysis is good. It turns their Dro argument. Dro believes in civic engagement in the first place, which means they don't get access to the role of the ballot. Second, there's no corruption link. Their first piece of evidence is about the World Bank wanting to highlight corruption, like Trump wanting to drain the swamp. That's not the same thing as weaponizing the affirmative against conservative candidates, particularly for against money. Second, the second card is not about the affirmative. It doesn't highlight how transparency rules actually get employed to increase any form of corruption. The explanation is not there in the 1 and C. Fourth, this permutation do both double bind. Either the permutation resolve all of their offense or the alt doesn't overcome any links in status quo. Fifth, there's no ethical obligation. There's no infinite ethical obligation. Obviously, the thing should be framed to consequentialism. If the affirmative is a good idea, you should do it. It's ridiculous to reject everything. That would involve rejecting things like the debate run. We should all get up and leave if the critique is good. 6 is conditionality. Conduct is negative kick out of straight terms, which uniquely kills my ability to leverage the case as both contradiction and strategically have to. So you may have enough time to hedge against two different advocacies with different unique conditions, but the 1 AR doesn't. Dispositionality solves all their offense because it doesn't kick out of straight runs. The impact debate, they forgot to read a warming impact, which is the only thing their far right evidence goes for. But all the impact turn, the impact turn, rejection of capitalism causes massive transition. Whereas here 3. The capitalist cost will not be relinquished to state force. No capitalist society is liquidated to anything anywhere, but nothing short of revolution will die in fact across the globe without capital upheaval. Capitalism would remain control. Extinction, 9 quest 5 anti-cap. Majority started turning away from free market and withdrawal the US from the Middle East, Far East, over the capital, the Americans, 6 million people would eat in peace. That's anti-cap dogmas over the global market, the millions of driving starvation, national totalitarianism moving to Asia, toward Asia, Europe, which matters for structural weapons. Cut the card at weapons. The alternative links to the disadvantage because the alternative links to alt links to the disadvantage because it collapses global capitalism. That's obviously key to sustain China's rise, which means that they result in the alternative collapsing global capitalism. They kill China's rise, which kills soft power and causes the disadvantage.
Cards you not.
Everything from 9 goes down. I did read 9 goes down. I did the rest of it.
What was the perm again?
Permutation to go. How many goes? Disad K case.
Is everyone good?
I'll concede no link on the dissent, but there's a clear warrant here that it should be extended. The first Rudinsman card talked about how new authoritarian regimes are more pragmatic than their predecessor, which takes out the impact turns on the cap K, which is their argument that even if they change from capitalism, this does not mean it would be linked to their impact turns. Their argument there are no new authoritarian regimes that are better than their predecessor and become more pragmatic and helping turn right, which proves the argument about the impact turns being false. Also, I'll ensure that more on the cap K, but in that I'll concede no link, which means that there is no reason to vote up the dissent, the cap K. The K was a floating pick and resolved the entirety of the 1AC. The argument, the alternative makes this very clear that we just disagree with the representations of the affirmative and specifically some of the policies. This does not mean that we would not engage with the state in any way, just that we should not engage in capitalist policies like the 1AC, which means that a risk of the links means you should vote negative right now because there is no question of this. Independently of that, their only theoretical objection on here was the counter, which I'll answer later. But the cap K resolved the entirety of the argument. As long as that, even if I'm winning the root cause argument, I want that the K could resolve the affirmative, which means that even if you let them the affirmative, there's no distinction between the two. Also answer their framework argument. They get to weigh the case argument, just that we also solve for the case, which means that the weighing is not unique in a world where both the affirmative and solve. I'll do the work later on that. I'm going to go for the full element here, that anti-corruption movement, that some sort of transformation, strategic employed by global capital countries and perfect neoliberal subject. The argument that Sean goes here for that is a question of the World Bank and developing countries, but this is our argument that the rhetoric of anti-corruption is something that is used against institutions trying to make more democratic and mold them into neoliberal subject. There are two arguments here. The first one was this, there are two arguments here. You say it's about developing countries, but no, you can see a case in analytic case argument that it is about increasing money, which proves that you just link into this harder, since the app is very specific to campaign finance argument that these forms of corruption were not deemed bad in the past, but the affirmative operates under the same notions of Eurocentric corruption, which is problematic because it just reify the same notions of Western capitalism. The argument that we should not engage in these same notions of corruption. The Fogel evidence makes two claims here, that corruption was not something that was necessarily bad for a while, but the affirmative operating that reifies those same notions of capitalism. The argument that we control the root cause of their Eurocentric argument. There's no reason about it. The second one is the Kunyama and Kania 14 of the positive approach is really used to enforce regressive accountability measures. They say that this is only to the affirmative argument that every time you try to impose these forms of accountability measures, they would just get used by the same governments that they try to solve for, which means that the affirmative cannot resolve any other link. Because the question here is about even if they're engaging in accountability measures, these are not actual accountability measures. They haven't isolated what those accountability measures look like and what the plan was. This is problematic because the one you see didn't actually extend any of the solvency are clearly articulate for you what the plan looks like. There was the extension of some cards and why the plan is good, but not how it is enforced and what the solvency actually looks like, which proves our arguments that capitalist institution will just exploit it. The neoliberalism impact card, the neoliberal cause extinction, massive social inequality, the far broad evidence. There are two arguments here. One, you can just cross-apply the same argument about more pragmatic authoritarian regimes are coming in, which would prove our argument about their impact terms. They go for that. It causes racism and inequality. Really quickly, they might try to cross-apply the colonialism argument from the de-status reading why democratic institutions are good, but this argument is also preemptive because their evidence from 14 arguments is more recent, talking about how China's become more pragmatic and starting to care about their predecessors. The alternative is the rejection of the moral. I'm not going to go for the moral obligation. I'm just going to go for the alternative result linked to withdraw from the logic of capitalism. With the Johnson evidence, does not make a claim that we should reject the state at large. It's just a claim that there are capitalist ideologies within the state, and those are the reasons why the state is bad, which proves that we are pragmatic into a solution, which the 1AR conceded, which proves that we are a good solution. Also, independently results linked. The alternative results are linked for two reasons. One, their representations about how the app engaged in the same representation. The alternative would not engage in the same representation. The second argument that we would not engage the same basic transparency with a clear standard. Like, there's a larger analysis that must occur. You say no root cause argument, but this argument is relevant. If we're winning that, you still get to weigh the case. You should use root cause arguments as a tiebreaker. I've already answered the framework. I mean, they say no corruption. Like I've already answered. They say the permutation. The permutation is not. There's no net benefit, and also there's a risk of the links to the friend, which means you should just err. You should just err negative on this. But they say condo. I'll answer that now. Counter-interpretation, the negative may have one conditional critique must pick or it is not must be pick the critique or the status quo in the two and I mean fairness level. One counter-interpretation solves time to limit the one see two arguments enforce the choice in the two so the minimal time speed no the two I mean that the links are smaller than any other impact on two aspects of plan, which was a new plan, which means you should err heavily negative in the space. Since they read a new app and I just read one conditional because there's no reason to vote it. They should just err reasonability. If you can defend your affirmative against the K, which you probably should have known I was going to go for, then there's no reason you should vote up condo. Two, account three counter-interpretation solves application. The entire one should be designed to criticize status quo, adding status quo the uniquely unharmful position makes even when it does not account should be easy when the status quo is that since the critique is adapted to the app and the quo is in return after the infinite terms, so they have tons of conditional applications. Link turns every single advantage to their interpretation means that they actually rectify the use. I should get infinite conditional critique on limited one. That's more reasonable. On the education one term, we should get ground applications and how policymakers in the real world function. No rational logic we force between two alternatives that are worse than status quo. Which proves that our advocacy is good. The framework evidence is I've already answered that. They say no consequentialism and the two impact terms. I've already answered that. Go to the case. The problem with the case was that there's not a clear explanation of what the affirmative action does and how it interacts with the case. They say solvency and no spillover claim, but our argument here is that the one you see a set of representation which is inherently flawed and operating within those same notions is problematic, which they have just not answered. They say it's about developing countries, but our argument that you relied on the same Eurocentric understanding of corruption, which is inherently problematic. They should just reinscribe the same power structure that the one you tries to go for, which means that the critique can resolve the entirety. Even if I'm not winning a gigantic root cause claim, I still want that specifically the one AC cannot solve for anything because they just recreate the same harms that they try to go for, which means that there is no independent reason. The only other thing to go for is this voting issue argument on the case. But the argument here is that this is not an argument about refugees being bad, rather it's an argument about civil war imposes things on refugees, and that is problematic, which is wrong with that status quo argument that more civil war comes from democracy and that then refugees are imposed with these same negative things. Our argument that democracy imposes negative things onto refugees and that they are forced to become the carriers, which is the reason why democracy is bad, not a voting issue. If you think this is a question of representation, you should err on the question of democracies have made refugees look bad in the past. Argument that yes, and they impose these same negative stereotypes, which current democracy we just recreate, which proves that the 1AC is not worse and that the AK can resolve the entirety of the 1AC.
Okay, cool. 1 minute, or 45 seconds. Okay.
case, then the K.
Pretty good. The reason the 1 year was led on the explanation on the case was because the 1 and C dropped it. They considered the long piece of solvency evidence with long entails analysis. If the 2 has lots of explanation for how the links interact, you should error heavy on 2 error explanation. Here's what the affirmative does. A lot of candidates get funding from political parties, get funding from different institutions. People have the right to know what that is because they result and decreases corruption. Or long and Hazelton evidence says that people do have a vested interest in knowing, and there is representation. Here is what the affirmative conceptualizes corruption as: when people or politicians get money from sources that people don't know where that is, and those politicians can be indebted to their sources, and there's conflict of interest. The conflict of interest and populism impact was straight conceded by the 2R, which means the affirmative decreases the amount of populism and means that it's a good idea. The arguments on the line by line, they say there's no true representation. How you solve that was just explained above. They say the K resolved because they're running a root cause claim. How does the critique resolve? How does the withdrawing from the logic of capitalism solve populism? How does it solve people not knowing how to vote? Money is constitutionally required in Australian politics, which was an argument, which is the affirmative is the only way to resolve that. The last extension on the and those answer to the refugees extended a democracy impact term, but they concede that we don't link to those. Now the K. Start on the alternative. The alternative is not a floating pick. This was not mentioned in the 1 and C whatsoever. You should not vote on 2 in articulation. The alternative was literally just a withdrawal from the logic of capitalism. If they criticize the 1 and C, then there's no way that 2 in 1 error could have predicted that it was a floating pick, and don't vote on sketchy 2 in floating picks on the first place. Now what they conceded was that the alternative links to the disadvantage. They dropped this argument. It says that withdrawing from the logic of capitalism means that we withdraw from the logic of Chinese soft power. This causes massive amounts of violence because it causes ecological destruction, which is their dissent impact proper. No lip service to this impact of the term means there's a massive dissent to the alternative. You should vote affirmative on that dissent, even if you think they're winning a risk of the link. This outweighs any of their link arguments because they have not, their forward evidence impact analysis might be good, but they've not isolated why the link gets them to their impact analysis, and but they did isolate why the alternative solves capitalism, which means if they've conceded that it links to the disadvantage, and it outweighs the second argument I'll go for on is the transition, where it said they mishandle it. Their uniqueness evidence says that authoritarian regimes are cool, but their impact turn is not reliant on authoritarian regimes being bad. Our impact turn says that if you collapse global capitalism, countries will go to war because they'll perceive it as an opportunity to collapse the international global order. Russia and China still do have incentives to take over the market. Their own dissent evidence says China's trying to take over the world, which means it does give thesis to the transition wars impact turn. That means the alternative is a terrible idea, but also go for the permutation. Their only answer was that there's no net benefit because the ultimate floating pick and any risk of a link. That means they're functionally conceded the permutation and the permutation double blind, which means as a test of competition, if you think I'm losing everything else in the turn, you should vote affirmative on the permutation because their only answer was a floating pick, which I dealt with above. Now all I have to do is mitigate the link debate just a little bit. They isolate 2 links. Their first focal link says we want people in the neoliberal subject because our conception of corruption is bad. Explain to me what a Eurocentric conception of corruption is. Why the affirmative is that? What lines from the affirmative resulted in this? What the affirmative represented corruption as? The affirmative just says that people not knowing money in politics is a bad idea, which is not the argument. The next argument is that transparency is viewed and institutions will exploit because I haven't explained the 1 and C. This link evidence says absolutely nothing. This is the second link argument. They isolated. There's no reason the affirmative says. In fact, the very bottom of the evidence says that the transparency measure it's actually talking about was failed because it was not transparent enough, which concedes the thesis that we need to be transparent in the first place. Independently, the impact terms were massively mishandled. The disadvantageous argument does not handle them. They conceded that it all links to the DA. Good.
I have some of them. Actually, go ahead, you do it. I don't have a USB-C. I have a USB-C.
One AR, two.
Well, that
all 3 dots.
Yeah, please.
Thank you.